Hi, everyone, and welcome to Stock Market Today. It's Coram and Ed Carson with a breakdown of the action in today's session, Tuesday, October 15th. What do you have for us today, Ed?
Yeah, a lot of mixed action on the market today. I want to take a look at Nvidia, KB Home, and Ensign Group.
Okay, we will take a look at those stocks, but first let's take a closer look at the major indexes. So we had the S&P 500 down about 0.75% on the day. Same for the Dow, reversing lower off of a new high there. The Nasdaq was the hardest hit today with the tech-heavy index down 1%. Chip stocks hit especially hard on the session. The Russell 2000 small cap index was in the green today, up 0.25%. So, Ed, what do you make of today's action?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, the Dow and the S&P were basically they were coming from record highs. Even the Nasdaq is still above its 10-day line, so it's not like things are terrible. I think this was a really interesting day. Like when you have a follow-through day, or when you have a market breaking down, investors can, you all sort of know the path you're going to go. You're going to be buying, you're going to be selling, how much is all different, but you could have done different things tactically today. Whether you were trimming things, you say, you know what, I've got gains, I'm going to be holding them. You could have even bought some areas. They were mid caps and small caps and certain sectors that were showing strength today. Uh, it's hard to know. This is one where I think we're at key levels, whereas the NASDAQ basically back to those September 26 highs. There's some other stocks like that. So you'd really like to see at least the NASDAQ hold up. The Dow and S&P look a lot better. The small caps are just getting to where you like them. I mean, it's sort of like, and every time they seem to be getting to where you like them, that's when they turn around and disappoint. But it was actually for a while there, it looked like it was going to be a 2-year closing high for the Russell. Then it
Right.
didn't end up there.
Hmm.
Uh, and honestly, if you look on a monthly or a monthly basis, nothing beats the S&P 500 basic over the last several years. The Nasdaq sort of comes close, but if you look at the relative strength line, the relative strength line, obviously the S&P is going to hold it, but even there, the Nasdaq, there was a bit of outperformance, but not lately and not since 2020. I mean, really longer term, the S&P has shown amazing performance over that time. So that was just something I was noticing near the end. But I don't know if people need to do radical action day. It's really going to be hindsight that will make it look obvious what everybody needs to do. We could bounce easily from here, and all these things will look good again. And it wouldn't take much to see some real damage.
Hmm. Yeah, it always depends on time frame, right? So if you are a shorter term tactical trader, perhaps some trimming today, and it of course also comes down to your individual holdings. So there's no one size fits all solution, but those who are more position traders, perhaps they were leaning more on the weekly charts to put things in perspective, or just like what you were saying, are we holding above short-term support? That's sort of step one, versus just taking one day out of context, taking that step back. We are still in a power trend, so there are going to be days along the way where traders might get shaken out. And like you said, will this turn into something more? We'll have to see. Will we shoot back up? That's definitely a possibility as well. So we're going to remain flexible.
I think that's always a good idea. Now, obviously, people who are more tactical, those were probably people who are making short-term buys off of these short-term levels, and
Mhm.
they might be those positions might be underwater. So those are like, so somebody who's more short-term swing trader, they're probably were more exposed in a way that somebody who maybe built up their position more in September, early October, is not.
Exactly. Okay, next on our list, let's take a look at RSP to see how the equal weighted index is doing, the equal weighted S&P 500 that is reversing lower here, but down about 0.4% on the day, so less hit than the S&P itself.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Nasdaq was harder hit, and so the techs were there. So you strip out those heavy weights, and also the heavy weights of things like some energy names, which were also pretty bad today. So it was pretty solid. I mean, it's hard to be down when you're down 0.4% after hitting a record high.
Right. And here's a look at MDY. Mid cap said also reversing lower, but above a recent breakout area and looking stronger than small caps.
Yeah, they are. There's a lot of this has been a really sort of quietly was doing very well. It always seems to be forgotten. It did come down today, but it's hard to get upset about this either.
Okay, let's check in on Bitcoin, which looked promising early. A volatile day here because it ended up being a decent finish. Last I looked at IBIT, the Bitcoin tracking ETF, it had reversed lower. So, coming off of those lows and reversing back higher by the end of the day after a couple of days of power ed. So, your thoughts on this more speculative area of the market?
Yeah, and some of those things are working. It was pretty notable because often IBIT and the Bitcoin tends to move more like a speculative growth stock. And today, at least, those names, the Bitcoin shrugged off the weakness in chips and tech.
hmm And we've been talking about a trend line here that you could draw from the highs going back to March, clearing that today, as well as this 37.94 area, the peak from a couple of weeks ago. So potentially buyable here for those who have that kind of risk appetite.
Yeah, and just don't. It's sort of like having candy. Don't have too much of it. You can have a little bit, and I think generally have some speculative names, but you want a solid diet of fruits and vegetables in there too.
There you go. All right, let's take a look at SMH. As mentioned, chip stocks hit particularly hard today with the SMH chip sector ETF down 5.4% on the day. And there were a couple of different news headlines here.
Yeah, Nvidia to start off the day, and we'll get to that, but it's like Nvidia there looks like there's a report that there may be more curbs on AI chip exports, so that's not great for that. But the real news was ASML reported a day early, sort of accidentally reported on its website, and boy, I mean, they actually beat earnings views, but the bookings were like half of what were expected. I mean, it was just terrible, and on that front, so really coming down. A lot of chip equipment names are coming down. This is also going to really raises the stakes for Taiwan Semi, I think, as well, which reports in 2 days because they're not only big guide on the chip makers, but also chip gear makers. So, uh, back to SMH, while SMH is one way to play play chips, the fact is that there has been that dichotomy between a handful of chip names that have been doing reasonably well. I'm not saying that they're Nvidia or these others are in flying, but the chip equipment names were already sort of struggling. So you didn't see any real safety here. This was you didn't need to you didn't get any reduced risk from having SMH over say Nvidia.
Right. Well said. Okay, elsewhere, let's take a look at the home builders. Here's XHB, finishing just fractionally higher on the day, but still in a notable setup here.
Yeah, this has been acting well. A lot of these things came off late in the day. It seemed like it just there was so much weakness. We saw the mid caps. We saw these other things come down to sort of fade off in in that final hour, especially final. So not great, but yeah, it's holding in a buy zone. Had that nice move yesterday. Really held up well, given that interest rates came up quite a bit. It's again, it you never know where that might break. Like if you saw 10-year treasury yields go over 4.2 at some point, the home builders react to it.
Yeah.
But they despite that big raise, you look at XHB, it was just a modest pullback. It was pretty bullish action and bounced
hmm
right back. So uh, we're going to take a look at one. There's some others that have earnings that are going to be coming out next couple of weeks, but nice action.
Okay. And XLF financials remain in focus here, Ed, with bank earnings that started Friday and continuing to roll out this week for financial sector names. This also faded by the close, but a third straight day of gains after Friday's breakout.
Yeah, so banks, insurers, they're looking pretty good. I know Citigroup had a nasty reversal today. They were one of the many banks and others came off highs. So Citigroup,
Mm.
not exactly sure what happened there, but that didn't help.
Yeah.
So that was negative. But yeah, financials again, stepping back. You look on a weekly on XLF, that's still in the high. You can see the trend has been pretty positive over the last several weeks. So several months, yeah, and so it's been a pretty nice year. Financials of the relative strength hasn't been amazing. It's another sector. Again, this is holding up when techs have had been more of a lagging area. So one reason why the
Mhm.
S&P 500 has been doing so well.
Yeah. Okay. And last ETF, here's XRT, a number of retail stocks looking good on the day. And the XRT ETF up 1.2% on the day.
I mean, you could always do something with this. I just thought it was notable that retail, there were some names that,
Yeah.
were showing some interesting action, but I just thought that, yeah, retail, there were a lot of areas that were doing pretty well. And this actually held up a lot of its gains. But the RS line has not been good on this. So you'd
Hmm.
probably want to be looking for specific names. So there were some
Right.
specific names that were doing pretty well.
Yeah. Abercrombie, ANF, one of them, up 4 days in a row. So 2 days into the week, already up 7%. So one
Pretty
to
good.
watch there. Let's now take a look at Nvidia, which you mentioned earlier, Ed. Its biggest decline in a number of sessions here. I'm not sure exactly how many, but it has been forming the right side of the base. And Monday's close, that was a closing high for the stock, and it got pretty close to its prior all-time high reached in June of this year. But today, coming off by about 4.5% by sessions close. So spooked some investors here today. What's your make of the action and where it stands in terms of some key support levels?
Yeah, I mean, look, it found support at the 10-day line, which is a pretty, it doesn't take too much to get below the 10-day line, and but it held that, and it held above 131.26, as well as some earlier entries like that trend liners and that. But there's other ones that you could have used along the way. So that's nice. That's encouraging. Maybe it forms a handle here, as well, like a real, true, clear, not misshapen handle that sets the stage. But you can tell, like, there's a lot of chip names, a lot of Nvidia's AI chip peers that are right around buy points or early entries. And so you could imagine a 2 or 3% drop and Nvidia starts looking sort of weak, a 2%, 3% gain, and people saying, hey, look at this, I'm going to buy this. So there's a lot of names in here that can change quite a bit. And that relative strength line, again, it was just getting to levels where you go, hey, it's getting close to highs. We weren't there. So again, a little more strength, and all of a sudden Nvidia looks like a real leader. A little more weakness, and it's like, oh yeah, it's sort of been lagging since June. Didn't everybody notice that? And so uh, a very key level for an Nvidia and a lot of those names that we talk about with Nvidia.
Right. And I do own the stock. I think that this is one that it's gone up from 100 to nearly 140. And what was that? Less than 2 months or so. So I wouldn't.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no, no. Go ahead.
The volume though is higher today. It hasn't been much on
Mhm.
the upside, and so
Yeah.
there's a reason why the AD rating is a D. Now, some of that's because of those high volume selling from a couple months before. I think even the up down ratio, which might look a little better, is only a 1.0. So that is one thing to note, is that there
Yeah.
hasn't been a whole lot of volume amidst this strong run up, but the price action still looks good.
Yeah, maybe it's not the stock it once was
Yeah.
anymore. So we'll have to see. Thanks for that, Ed. Let's go to KBH, a home builder to watch, trying to get back above some key moving averages here. The 50-day and the 21-day line clearing a downtrend. It did close off highs, but still up 1.5% on the day.
Yeah, so this one's pulled back. Others, are stronger, maybe have held up, but this one we have an emerging base again, right next to the other one that it just sort of that it failed. It looked like sort of it could be an early entry today. It did fade off. It wasn't, this is one of the things. It was like when the whole market is sort of weak and you have these pockets of strength. It's always how much do you really want to venture out, because there's always the risk that those will come in, and that's what happened to some extent with a lot of those areas. If it gets above today's high, again, you could probably see it as actionable because there's a nice bounce here. Definitely a lot of names in the housing construction space that are looking strong. Obviously interest rates in the general market are important, but definitely one to watch going forward.
Mhm. And Ed, what are your thoughts on KBH versus some of its peers? Is is this one the best of the bunch in your view?
It's tough because there's probably others that made moves. It's one of those tricky things that others have made. I'm trying to think. Pulte Homes, I think, Toll Brothers are moving up, but that faded a little bit. But Pulte Homes, but that one has earnings next week.
Yeah.
That one. So some of these are at highs, but they're further off from the 50-day line. So there's different things like, yes, you would have liked to have gotten them yesterday. And so now there's a balance, dude. Where do I get that? And this is actually a group where XHB can work out pretty well, or ITB, because they do tend to move together to a fair amount. So that's something where if you want to reduce the individual stock risk, but without necessarily getting a laggard character to it. Obviously, there's always going to be some that do outperform even more, but I think this is one also where XHB where the ETFs are pretty solid alternative.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Last but not least, ENSG. This is Ensign in the medical long-term care group. We had a bit of volatility, Ed, a couple of weeks ago, but this is a stock that's trying to get back up on its feet. Overall, taking that step back. June, July, August, pretty strong for the stock. Just a little bit of volatility recently. What do you make of the action here?
Yeah, the sell-off was to a great extent. There's other factors, but one of the factors was that it was being dropped, right, being promoted from the 600 to the 400. But there's fewer funds that follow the 400, so it means the net selling for a day or two. But it didn't really, it quickly hugged the 50-day line. Is back above. Yeah, there's some areas there. It's back above the 50-day line. There hasn't been much volume on the way up, but even on the way down, that big down day, there was a sort of a support day. So those two big volume days were sort of support days. So, it's not as negative as you'd think. There's a lot of stocks like this, unfortunately. There were some of the stocks that were flashing buy signals or early entries. They have earnings in the next day, week or so. And that's just something that people need to keep in mind, is that, so I would be really hesitant to buy this, but I also wanted to bring it up because people need to be paying attention to that. Is that there's a lot of names that are doing that, and that's only going to get worse next week because the next 2 or 3 weeks are so busy. But I think this is really attractive. This is again an area that has shown strength. It has some decent growth. It's not unfortunately, it's a growth market, long-term care. So people should be looking at this one on a weekly basis. I think is working toward a new base. Maybe it needs another week. It's certainly not there yet, but this might be its 5th week. So this could have a new flat base after this week. So maybe the way it is you watch this and you wait for a strong move on earnings. But yeah, steady earnings, steady earnings line that's trending higher. That's been really nice.
Okay. Earnings in 8 days, as you mentioned, November 23rd. That is next Wednesday. All right. Well, that is it for today's show. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. We will be back with more tomorrow morning on IEBD Live, investors.com/IEBD Live for all the details. We will see you there. And we'll also see you right back here tomorrow after the close. And we do have another program coming up today, live at 5 p.m. Eastern, our weekly swing trader status update show. So we will see you there. And then we will post that to investors.com/videos after that wraps. So see you then, and then see you tomorrow morning on IBD Live. Bye for now, everyone.